Today we are with Joel Thorstein. Sorry if I've got that wrong, but on his Twitter profile, he is a digital ecologist at Three Box Labs, and Three Box Labs is working with Identity Index (IDX) and the Ceramic Network, which are both very interesting projects. They've already got a lot of traction, and what we hope to do over this interview podcast is essentially go into and do a deep dive of those. And I think the best way to kind of kick off these podcasts is Joel, is if you kind of just like describe your sort of journey into what you're doing now, your background, and how you got into it, and then we can start talking about Three Box Labs, and then obviously the different protocols within that.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Excited to chat. So I got into crypto. I don't really remember exactly when. Like there was kind of like a gradual process, but I really got into it 2015. Started working with a company that was doing stuff in the Ethereum space. At the time, I was also doing my master's in complex adaptive systems. So um, that type of research that happens there also like ties very neatly into crypto economics and token engineering. Um, but as I was diving in, I started working on this project called Uport, which was doing decentralized identity on Ethereum in various ways. And that's where I met my co-founders, where we created Three Box Labs. And so Three Box Labs saw kind of like a wider space of like what identity online is. It's not only about KYC and credentials, but it's rather about all the data that you generate when you interact with other people and applications online. So we built kind of like a first prototype with Threebox, which is like an SDK for developers to build decentralized applications. And eventually, in kind of the effort of like making that completely decentralized, turned into our main focus and project right now, which is called Ceramic Network. And so Ceramic is essentially a decentralized protocol for user-generated content and data in general. And I guess also like so IDX is a framework on top of Ceramic that is essentially a way to structure data for one particular identity, and in a way where developers can kind of specify how the structure of the data that they store with the user looks like. So in a way, you can think of it as a decentralized user table. So in traditional databases, you have when you're building an application, you have a backend and that has some kind of database that stores your user table, and that's essentially like username, their hash password, and like all the other information. So Facebook has a huge user table, Google has as well. But with IDX on top of Ceramic, we're essentially creating the user table of the internet that's shared between all of the applications that we build on Web3. So I guess that's like a very quick overview of like the stuff uh, I'm doing.
I mean, one thing I'm interested in is the kind of relationship between Three Box Labs and the two different protocols, Ceramic and IDX. How are they operated or how they're interrelated in a sense? Because are they the main kind of like owners or the main like gatekeepers, let's say, that are maintaining and building on these, or is it more open source? Yeah, I mean, just in terms of you know like understanding of how they kind of relate. Obviously, I think Web3, you're allowed to like have a lot of different organizational kind of things, and I'm just kind of interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, so we started Three Box Labs as a company, and we were like experimenting with different technologies. And so once we started writing the specification and then writing the implementation of Ceramic, that we saw that as like a separate thing from Three Box Labs, but we were always kind of the main kind of core developers. I mean, so far there was actually other people that were building like alternative implementation based on the Ceramic specification. that we didn't even know about, but eventually we ended up hiring them. But yeah, and right now there's like even interest in like having other teams that just want to build alternative implementations of the Ceramic protocol. So we see Ceramic as like a completely separate thing that's just a decentralized network. And Three Box Labs, our company, is kind of the first contributors to that network.
Can you expand, Joel, just a little bit about how IDEX and Ceramic work together?
Yeah. So Ceramic in itself is a protocol for kind of data streams. So what that means is you have when you can create a stream, and then a user is a controller of that stream. So we're using to represent the user, we use the DID, decentralized identifier standard, as a way of representing a user or an actor in the system. And so a user can create a stream and then can emit events to that particular stream that modifies the state of that object that the stream represents. So that's kind of like the core primitive of Ceramic, this immutable data object. And so you can do a bunch of different things with that, but in order to kind of make it easier to build user-centric applications, we created IDEX as a framework where developers can essentially they have like an SDK that they can use, and they can create definitions, which basically provides some description of the data. And so essentially each user's identity index, there is like an index of definition to record mapping. And so the definition contains like metadata information about the record. So some description, some JSON schema that the data has to conform to, and maybe some other metadata information. And so that's shared by all users, the definition and the definition's kind of identifier. But then each user has their own record for that definition. So it's essentially like an abstraction on top of Ceramic to make it easier to build user-centric applications.
Interesting. And in terms of, and I think it might be worth pointing out, like a lot of like stuff that's like created in, let's say, for instance, NFTs is immutable. It's there on a blockchain. So how do you guys essentially make that mutable? How do you change that sort of data?
Yeah. So I guess a lot of NFT projects use a protocol called IPFS. And so in IPFS, you have a file, you put that into IPFS, and then you get a content identifier, which is essentially just the hash of the image or the audio file or whatnot. And then you might mint an NFT that like has the CID as the metadata information. And obviously you can't mutate something that just the hash of something. It's just like a static identifier. So in Ceramic, we actually use IPLD, which is the IPFS data structure, as the underlying way to represent the event log in a Ceramic stream. So what that looks like is we first create kind of a genesis event that contains like the initial state of this object. And then for any subsequent update, there is an update that contains a signature. The signature was made by this controller or the owner, which is the DID of that stream. And then you essentially create a hash linked event log. So each new update to this event stream points to the previous update in the stream. And so at any point in time, any external observer can look at this event stream and verify the integrity. And so in addition to the signatures, we also anchor these updates into the blockchain. So you get like a tamper resistant timestamp of like when the different events happened. So with all of that information, you can have a pretty solid kind of understanding of like what's changed at what point in time and what's the state of this object right now.
Yeah, I think that covers quite a lot of ground. And one kind of question I have is, regarding like how, I suppose this is probably going to reveal a lot, but how do you like? Is there a cost involved in like updating data? Is it a constant stream where you just open a stream, and essentially, I think like charged particle where you can constantly have transactions between two parties. How does that kind of operate?
Yeah. So right now, sorry. Right now in Ceramic, you have to run your own node to pin the data streams, which is relevant for you or your application. So what that looks like right now for most applications is that the people running an application basically also run a Ceramic node and pin the streams that are relevant to their app. Obviously, you can run multiple nodes and pin the same stream on multiple nodes, so you get redundancy. Um, but obviously, this kind of requires users to either run their own node or to trust a third party to run a node to maintain their data, which most users are not going to do that. So our kind of goal for the next year is to add an incentive layer to Ceramic where you can actually pay the network to pin and maintain the state of your streams. So that's kind of and that would be paid in like a native Ceramic token. But currently it's free, and but you need to run your own node.
Cool. Yeah, that I think that covers a lot of ground. And in terms of, I suppose, identity, what's your like kind of goal in that angle? Do you guys want to become like an infrastructure layer within all the other Web3 protocols, or what's your kind of ambitions in that regard?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit funny if you look at kind of the decentralized identity space, that when we were part of like the Uport project, which was basically the first identity project on Ethereum and one of the first projects doing identity in kind of on decentralized technology after Bitcoin. Um, Most of the use cases that were like people in the identity space were looking at, it's like, oh, we need KYC, or we need this verification from this third party that can be verified by this other third party. So it's kind of like a very traditional view of like what identity is. But as we kind of learned more and started like experimenting, and this kind of one of the reasons we spun out 3box is like identity is not something that's handed to you by your government. It's rather, it's like if you think about your real world identity, like who you are as a person, that comes from you, like comes to you from like your interactions with other people, your interactions with the world, and that kind of makes up who you are. And so why should it be any different online? So instead of trying to model issue verification and issuance, use issuing credentials, we want to use model any type of like interactions you do digitally, and like make sure all of those interactions can be cryptographically verifiable. And from that, identity kind of becomes an emergent phenomena. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that essentially means that we become more of like an infrastructure where different applications build various type of identity related things, which might be like branded as an identity centric thing, or it might be just like an application that has properties that are kind of identity related. But the cool thing is then there can come like a third application that just takes all this information, aggregates it, and provides some kind of reputation score or something in certain contexts.
With the identity piece there, besides what can sort of be verified either on chain, so to speak, how does Ceramic kind of speak to things that are off chain? So, for example, if you're sort of verifying that somebody has a Twitter account or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, you can think of the data that's on Ceramic as kind of off-chain, like it's not put onto Ethereum or not onto any other blockchain. It lives in these data streams, which are cryptographically verifiable, but they live off the Ethereum or other blockchain. And so for verifying kind of like a Twitter account, yeah, that looks very much like, you know, a traditional credential that's issued by a third party and then verified. I mean, it can be verified locally or in some context. So we actually have in our main kind of, we have a profile application called self.id, and that there you can go and like verify a Twitter profile, and then you will get a verification, like a verifiable credential that is issued by 3box Labs that says like, it looks at your Twitter profile and make sure that that's associated with your decentralized identifier. And so if so, it issues like this verifiable credential that anyone can verify. And if they trust 3box Labs, then they can be sure that this Twitter account is associated with this DID. But it also includes a proof, because if you want to make that verification, you have to make a tweet that includes your DID, your decentralized identifier. So I could, if I want, re-verify that claim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting. I think one of the questions we kind of had internally is, since we're kind of creating these data streams, how does it interface with an oracle? Is it an oracle? Is it not an oracle? Or is it competing with an oracle? What's the kind of interrelationship with that?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. I think the data stream in itself is not really an oracle. I mean, all the data that you put into a data stream is like, cryptographically tied to the author of that data stream. So you have like verifiability in a way that you don't have on the traditional web. So if you think about like the current oracle systems that exist in kind of on Ethereum and other blockchains, you have Chainlink and API3, and they kind of just like look at the web page, take a snapshot or pull out some data, then they put that information on chain and get paid for it. And that's very kind of subjective. Each node might get a different reasons, but and because like none of that information is like really, cryptographically verifiable or like deterministic. Whereas in Ceramic, the data is put into a data stream, you kind of always will get the same result given that you've seen the same events. So I think there's a lot of synergies to be had with like Oracle systems that can be optimized to read data out of Ceramic. Potentially, like Oracle systems could be built into the Ceramic protocol if we want to put data on chain, but that's kind of not really our primary focus right now. But yeah, oracles on Ceramic, or the oracles that like native to the Ceramic protocol that just put data on chain, would be like way less subjective than oracles that just pull data from Web 2.
That's definitely a very interesting, interrelationship that will obviously come to fruition a bit more down the line. One project I'm interested in, and I suppose, we could, I suppose it touches on the whole Oracle aspect as well, is the GeoWeb network. It kind of struck out to me because it uses a lot of kind of infrastructure, and Ceramic is at the heart of it. I mean, like, do you have, what was your kind of relationship with the project, and how does kind of Ceramic fit into that ecosystem?
Yeah, so the GeoWeb project was a very pleasant surprise. They came into our community and like, hey, we're building this thing, which is super cool. And so yeah, that was definitely like a joy moment, and like very early in our development, see something like that with such vision. So I guess to some context on what they're doing, they have created a system where you have an NFT and an NFT represents basically a geographic location on planet Earth. And if you have this NFT, you're allowed to control the current kind of AR content on that location. So the AR content on any particular location can be changed, but only if you own that NFT. And then in order for the NFTs to be tradable, they're not tradable like regular NFTs. That rather they use a Harburger tax model where when you buy the NFT, you set a kind of price that you're willing to sell the NFT for, and then you have to pay a tax like 10% of that per year that you pay to the protocol. And so their GeoWeb protocol can get like rewards, or like I guess have some kind of revenue that they can use to further develop the system with those taxes, and all of these all the NFTs in their system becomes kind of like liquid in that way. And so the way they use Ceramic is, if they want this AR content that lives on a particular location to be changeable, they need some way to facilitate that change. So they couldn't just use like a normal way of like having a static thing for the NFT. And so that's where they use a ceramic stream to represent the content in the location, and they set the controller of that stream to be an NFT. So we introduced like a feature in Ceramic. I mean, that was kind of partly like inspired. Like they were thinking about this use case, and I was thinking about like NFTs in general. And since we were using this DID standard, we're kind of limited to only have kind of identifier controlling streams that are representable as DIDs. So why not represent an NFT as an NFT? Sorry, an NFT as a DID. And so this allows us to have data streams that are only changeable by the current owner of an NFT. And so that's exactly what they use in GeoWeb. Only the current owner can update the content of that data stream that sets what the current AR content is for that location. So that, I mean, that project is like really visionary, and really excited to see where it goes.
You've mentioned DIDs, or the decentralized identifiers, a few times. Can you just expand, just kind of take a step back there and expand on what specifically those are and how they relate to how Ceramic sort of verifies things?
Yeah. So in any cryptographic system where you want some kind of identifier, or you want some kind of author verifiability, you have to use asymmetric cryptography. And in particular, you have a public key and a private key. And the public key is used to verify signatures that are done by the private key. So someone that holds the private key can make a signature, and anyone that holds the public key, which is public, so anyone can see it, can verify it. But only the person with the private key is like able to create the signatures. Mm-hmm. So they can be used to verify, the author of things. But you run into a problem if you want to start creating or start like updating which key is associated with an identity. So in many cases, it's not good enough to just have a public key be your identifier, because you want to rotate your key once in a while. This is like standard practice if you look at like scaled systems that are deployed on the internet today, like the DNSSEC and like all of these kind of HTTPS certificates that we are using at scale at the internet. Like we need to rotate the keys to maintain security, because if we have like a key that just lives forever, that's the kind of risk of that leaking becomes larger and larger. Mm-hmm. So a decentralized identifier is just a way of kind of creating an abstract identifier that's not tied to a specific public key, and instead allowing you to change that key over time. So you have a decentralized, like the DID itself is a string that says basically DID colon a DID method, which is just like another string name, and then colon, and then just a kind of random bunch of characters. And you can put that into a DID resolver, and that gives you back a DID document. And so the DID document contains public keys. It contains keys you can use to verify signatures. It may contain public keys that you can encrypt data to. So you have support for like both signature verification and encryption. And at any point in time, the controller of this DID can revoke the old keys, add new keys, and then thus rotate the keys. And that's, we use that in Ceramic because like we need this ability for users to change keys over time to maintain security and do proper key management.
Cool. And I think I appreciate you staying with us, but we're jumping all over the place, and I do acknowledge, but I mean, there's so many different interesting paths and routes that you can go down. But going back a second to the GeoWeb, you mentioned an NFT can be a DID, and that for me is quite mind blowing. Could you expand a bit on how that kind of happens, or was there relationship there?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward actually. So, if you have an NFT, you can always look up who is the current owner of that NFT on the blockchain. So that's on Ethereum, that's like, an Ethereum address. And so the NFT did basically just takes the identifier in the did NFT is just, the contract address of the NFT, and then the identifier token ID of that NFT. And when you resolve that, the DID document, you basically just look up who's the owner of the NFT, and you put that Ethereum address and some additional kind of metadata for the owner in the DID document, and give that back as a resolution result of that DID. And that's basically it. Then you can use like verify any signature that's done by the owner of that NFT. And so it's just kind of like a recursive lookup of like, okay, who's the owner, and then allow that owner to make signatures on behalf of this NFT. So there are some people that are working on like OAuth protocols for DIDs and like ways to like sign in using DIDs. And so you could, like NFT would plug right into that. So like you can have access passes where you can only log in if you have a certain type of NFT and stuff like that. So it kind of can interoperate quite nicely with the rest of the DID ecosystem.
I mean, so the other kind of thing I've kind of noticed on Ceramic is that you mention a lot of different chains that you work with, Avalanche, Moonbeam, and obviously Ethereum, and Near as well is a new one. How does Ceramic interact with these? Is it do you have different instances, or is there is it just going to your own kind of like mainnet, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing we do with other blockchains is essentially allow them to create streams and store data in Ceramic. And so people that are building applications like dApps essentially might be using most people building like a dApp are using one blockchain, right? And a user that comes to an application usually have to have a wallet, and the wallet has an address. So in the case of Ethereum, we map the Ethereum address to the user's DID. But you can map like other blockchain addresses to the user's DID as well. So you can map like a Near address, you can map like a Filecoin or Polygon or Polkadot, whatever, to your DID. And so what that allows you to do is have one kind of identifier of all your data in the Ceramic network that is tied to your accounts or your wallet addresses on multiple different blockchains. And what that essentially allows you to do is bring your data across different kind of ecosystems across Web3. So even if like there might be silos of like the financial apps or whatever, which you have on like blockchains on Ethereum or Polkadot or Near, you can still kind of have the same experience, have the same profile, bring the same data with you to the applications. So you feel that silo much less because all of your content is still with you.
That's an interesting aspect. And I mean, is it theoretically possible to have a to have an NFT in one chain and then have that represented on other chains, or is that outside scope?
You mean like transferring the NFTs between chains?
Yeah, I mean, I know you can do that via bridges for some chains, but I mean, isn't there a way that you could represent? I mean, maybe the answer is no, and you can't. But isn't there a way that you could supposedly like cross-reference or have like one sort of identifier across chains for that specific token?
So you mean if you have two tokens, two NFTs on like two different chains, and then like create one identifier for them?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in theory, that should be possible, but I mean, you'd still have two separate kind of transaction logs on each blockchain for the two different NFTs, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. I'm just jumping off your previous thoughts, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely create like streams that reference different things on different networks. I don't know exactly like how you would use that or like what that would be useful for, but yeah, it might be interesting to explore.
Cool. And the other kind of interesting thing, I mean, since you're creating data streams, like how would you guys like essentially introduce search? So what I mean by that is like how do you I think the graph is trying to do this, but essentially how are you going to like go through the data of all these different streams? Or I mean, is that not your kind of problem, or is your goal just building infrastructure? But obviously once you have huge amounts of data, you have to kind of seep through it, no?
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously you can do various types of indexing like the graph protocol is doing on blockchains on top of Ceramic, and like just create different indexes for the data. That's like one thing you can do. Another thing that might be interesting is like you concatenate a bunch of the data and then run some computation on top in order to get some insights from the data. Right now, we currently only support public data on Ceramic, but we are planning to add ways for users to like store data encrypted on Ceramic. And so in that case, it will become very difficult for external observers like the graph to index that data. And then there might be other things needed. You can in that scenario where you have like a bunch of encrypted data, it might be more interesting to do things like federated machine learning, where someone creates a model, encrypts it, and sends it to all the users, where train the model locally and sends back the updated gradients to the model owner, and then the model owner basically has like a machine learning model that's fitted to some specification, but trained on everyone's kind of private encrypted data. So I don't know, like there's a lot of different things you can do. I don't want to like, point people in one direction and say like, hey, this is the way you do it, because I think there's a lot of things that could emerge. I guess the one thing that we would probably like look at first is just like create an so I mentioned like an index of definitions. So I mentioned in IDEX you have this definitions and records, and a lot of applications want to be able to see kind of what are all the users that have a specific definition inside of their IDX index. So an application can basically see like all of their users. So that might be something that one of the first ways to index that we build into the protocol. Whether that happens natively in Ceramic or on some other layer like the graph is still to be determined.
I'm just curious to Grit's question there, sort of kicked off this around having some way to like search data. Like, have you thought about having like a front end at all, like a Wolfram Alpha type thing where you can sort of like um, ask the ask the oracle, so to speak, or is that just not really in the scope of what you're looking at?
So there is a project called Tiles that basically provide like an explorer type view on Ceramic. So if you know the stream ID of something or of a data stream in Ceramic, or I don't know if they support this right now, but query some data based on the ID. Um, General search, I mean, it would be interesting. That's not something we are working on right now, but yeah, I mean, it would definitely like be useful. But I also wonder, like, in a lot of cases, you might be looking for data based on like who the author is, because like if you're looking for a scientific paper, for example, uh, you likely either know the title or you know one of the author. Because usually, if you see a reference, you see the author, and you can just go directly to that author.
And I mean, again, going back to, and I think you kind of like shed a light, a lot of light on the whole NFT aspect. But in terms of like future potential NFT applications, where do you kind of see that going, or what are some interesting ideas that you've thought about in terms of NFTs? Because one reason we ask is because we talked to a cursed share, and they integrated with Chainlink to create the first sort of dynamic NFT, where basically the metadata was updating in real time regarding based on price or something. Based on the NFT price. Is there something that could happen with Ceramic where there's a monitoring of a certain data stream and the NFT is being updated?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there always needs to be like some type of agent that controls a data stream. So whether that's like the current owner of an NFT, you could also create an NFT in Ceramic that where the metadata is just a stream that is controlled by um, like an artist. Or I have a friend who like asks about like, hey, can we create a system where we have a bunch of streams on Ceramic. It comes from IoT devices that measure like real world data from various ecological sites, and just like reporting that, and have the access control to those data streams be controlled through an NFT. So I think use cases like that are interesting, like either access control through the NFT, so like the data is encrypted always to the current holder of the NFT, or like any kind of thing where you want the current owner of the NFT to be able to modify the entire thing, or modify like some properties. So you might have an art piece that only the current owner can change and set the color on. Looking further ahead, so right now in Ceramic, the mainstream type that we have, it allows you to like create a JSON object and then like update that object over time. But we are looking at creating more kind of dynamic programmability into streams, so you can put your own logic that gates how a stream can be updated. So that would be some kind of program that runs every time an event is emitted to a stream, and so that will allow you to have like some kind of programmable logic that people can call on an NFT. And so that could be like some kind of image rendering, or really like any type of logic that you could put into um, into code could be like controlled and accessed through an NFT.
I'm seeing a lot of the sort of NFT and crypto space go towards, away from sort of just DeFi, just the finance and now this sort of art NFT wave, and now things are moving towards gaming and organizations and collaborating, that sort of thing. Have you guys worked with anybody in this sort of gaming space or anything that are building using this?
Um, there might be some projects that build gaming related things on Ceramic. I know there's at least some projects that build like 3D environments where they use ceramic streams to represent kind of mutability in the 3D space. In terms of like, you know, governance and organizations, that's one of our kind of core focuses with Ceramic, is providing infrastructure for people building tooling for various types of like decentralized governance, be that like, you know, user profiles or forums where they can make comments and suggest improvements, or even like represent part of like signaling or voting inside of Ceramic, since like the entire, you know, event tree is cryptographically verifiable. That gives you more certainty about what happened at what point in time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we definitely want to focus on NFTs, but you know, because of the versatility of the project, is you know, one interesting project I kind of see, and you know, you just briefly mentioned regarding, you know, voting, is boardroom, you know, whereby they essentially you know, do crypto governance, and they use ceramic quite a lot. Um, I mean, do you want to expand on that? I mean, and another interesting project is ArcX, and you know what you mentioned about ArcX, and you know, they're JSON, and you know, you mentioned JSON files, and you need JSON files as metadata for a lot of NFT projects. I mean, you like there's so much versatility in the protocol. You know, there's so many different kind of ways. Like, which which one do you think? I suppose, you know, to try to sum it up, is, you know, which one do you think is like the bigger problem to be solved, or you know, or rather, which one are you more passionate about? I suppose.
Um, you mean in terms of governance versus NFT stuff, or how more on like how people are using the protocol?
How people are using the protocol.
Okay. So I see two main approaches people take right now with Ceramic. I think both are kind of valid and speaks to kind of two different needs. So one is, you know, completely decentralized applications that where all data is like authored by the user, and if you want to create a forum or something like that, like it basically each user has their own stream, and like where they post their own comments, and then you kind of aggregate that into one view. Um, and we're also working on like, you know, multi-writer streams, because right now you're limited to one writer per stream. But that kind of like, okay, now you've gone like full decentralized application. There's no backend, and you don't rely on any particular server. You just like have you run your blockchain nodes. You have some Ceramic nodes, and all of the data is kind of maintained in there. And of course, that is the most challenging way to architect and build applications, but it also gives you, you know, a lot of security and resilience. Another thing we've seen in a few different applications is using Ceramic as a way to kind of decentralize your backend, or providing like um, a kind of resilience factor and backup for your backend. So essentially, users log into the system, they make some comments or make some edits, and that's sent to the backend. And the backend essentially has a Ceramic DID and writes these action onto a stream. And so the stream is created and updated by the backend, and that's used to create the view on the front end. But it's the backend that is control of the data. And while, you know, you have a backend now that, you know, controls the data, you still have kind of more resilience, because even if that backend goes offline, you have the data available, and you could easily migrate that to a new system. And I think both of those use cases are valid. I think that the latter one is something we didn't exactly expect, but it speaks to like how much um, value just having like a decentralized event log system that is replicatable across a peer-to-peer network, like how valuable that is. Because it does, like, even if you have a backend, if that backend is stored across multiple nodes, and people who rely on your application can know that even if your organization disappears, they have the kind of raw data to be able to spin up a new backend or keep at least a history of like what happened in as they were using the application.
In terms of like identity in general, you do say it's going to be like an emergent kind of factor, and it's, I mean, and that's definitely true. We're the sum of like our environment in a lot of senses. In terms of like going forward into the future, and let's say Web3 has like sort of, it's got mainstream adoption. What kind of applications do you think can be built on this, let's say, identity layer? I mean, just spitballing here.
So I guess before kind of diving into ideation, one thing that I feel is important to highlight if you're building something that involves identity is um, the ability for people and kind of people that use this technology to be able to be pseudonymous, right? So I can use a decentralized application and I don't have to reveal the name of my real name or like my governmental issued passport name, whatever. Instead, I can use some kind of pseudonym that no one really can tie to my normal or my real world identity. Um, and I think like that's something like that culture we've seen a lot in Web3. People are launching like unknown projects, people who develop on large protocols like Wirearn, like are completely pseudonymous. They have like a Twitter profile with some anime picture on and don't really reveal who they are to the larger world. I think for an identity system to be successful, we have to allow for that kind of flexibility. We can't just like enforce some kind of real world or like state issued identity to be the norm. That's what Facebook is doing, and it's like obviously causing problems. And I think so that's like a really important aspect. And yeah, I think like obviously like reputation based on um, aggregated contributions over time. So you might be contributing to like an NFT project or to some DAO ecosystem, or doing work for various types of distributed organizations. And based on that, you will start building some kind of reputation. I think one thing that is important in this is that we don't build one global reputation system, right? Like one score to rule them all, I think could be really harmful. And so I think it's important that if you're building an application that involves some kind of reputation, um, that you think about, okay, what is relevant for this application, and what is not relevant for this application. How can I create how can I make sure that my reputation score is relevant and specialized for my use case? And so hopefully we'll see like a bunch of different ways of measuring reputation, where it might have a huge like score, reputation, whatever in one organization, but if you go to the next, you're kind of like a noob, right? And that's pretty much how the real world works as well in some way. So I think that's important for us to not get into like some super dystopian scenario.
Yeah, the more we can have that sort of be sharded and not not have your like if you make a bad move in your like video game that shouldn't affect your like your job,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it needs to be contextual. Like that would be so bad. Like you like do something wrong in a game, and now you can't find a new job.
Well, like there is somewhat of an argument there though. So like I don't know if these things can maybe like bleed over, or there's like do you think there's a space for some sort of like talking between reputations? Because I think of somebody that I play like a multiplayer game with, and as soon as we start losing, they quit. Well, like I don't really want to hire that guy as a partner for my company now, right? Because I'm like, well, he just gives up at the first sign of adversity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like not completely separate, right? Because you will still have all of the data that's associated with your identifier, right? And so different reputation algorithms might, bring out different things from
Mm-hmm.
that data set.
Yeah.
Um, but they might still use the same underlying data, and like there might be some indicators or whatever that is related uh, to your gameplay that is relevant for work, but maybe not everything there.
Yeah, I'm just kind
Um,
of thinking out loud here, but like if I'm hiring a stock trader, maybe I want the guy who quits as soon as it starts going south.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So that's like a different different interpretation of that behavior. But yeah, I mean, obviously, uh, you could use a different persona or pseudonym for your gaming profile, which basically separates your data completely from your
Mm.
working profile, and there's nothing that stops, and in my opinion, should stop from someone from doing that, because you have to work to build up your reputation, right? Um, so and also like um, building these types of reputation systems will also be like trickier, like when you have a bunch of data that's more private and encrypted, and so then maybe you like selectively disclose some of the data to this reputation algorithm, or you have some other type of like privacy preserving system or computation that's run on your data. And so um, I think we'll see like a lot of experimentation over time, and the first ones will probably be super simple and pretty stupid.
Um,
Well, actually, one thing I would add to the kind of reputation slash identity thing is, so far, I guess we only talked about for reputation for one individual, but I think we're also going to see collective reputation of like a DAO, like a small organization that does something, and based on the behavior of like all of people involved or the collective output of the participants in that organization, you have kind of a reputation score that might have like an analog for like an individual, or not, but like basically like reputation is not only limited to like individuals. There might even be like systems that allow users to collaborate as if they were one individual, but they're actually like multiple people, and there's like not really a way to tell the difference. Um, so yeah, I think that's like an interesting point to highlight.
Yeah, I can see that being sort of incredibly valuable, especially to anyone sort of entering the space for the first time, to be able to see, oh, that organization, maybe I don't want to take money from them because they're basically mercenaries, versus this other organization actually wants to try and help build with me. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're sort of first entering in the space and you don't have those social connections and everything to know those, there's not really a way to know that until you're knee deep in it.
Right, and it might also be like a way of doing kind of apprenticeship or something like that, to like you're working with someone and they help you kind of build up your reputation.
Yeah, just by sort of being a part of that DAO, you can kind of boost your personal reputation almost. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
yeah, I think like, you know, just the nature of Web3 and crypto. I think it's reputation is a under examined kind of phenomena. Because you can have like entire entities represented the same amount, like in the same kind of similar kind of way as singular people are represented in some respects. In terms of the actual research kind of stuff, I think we more or less covered everything we wanted to go into. And yeah, I mean, like in like just like freeballing here, and we can wrap up soon, I suppose. But like, what are your kind of thoughts on the kind of NFT market in general? Like, like, do you participate, or do you stay out of it? What's your kind of general take, let's say?
I can't say that I participate a lot, just like I didn't participate a lot in the kind of 2017, 2018 ICO bubble, I guess. But I mean, I do see a lot of differences in what happened then versus what's happening now. There are some similarities as well, but yeah, it's like, because then back then you saw like a lot of people just creating a project with like some bogus white paper, like claiming to do whatever the heck, and like it was so obvious, like, oh, this is never going to go anywhere. Whereas now it's like the people who are like less honest or whatever create like an NFT project that has some pictures and then doesn't really do that much, but it's still like subjective value. So it's not that they're like so forthright in that it's a scam. It's not necessarily a scam. They're just like, oh, look, I created this NFT, buy it if you want. So like that's on the surface, I guess. I mean, there's so much happening underneath the surface in terms of like various ways of trading, fractionalizing, and getting utilities out of NFTs. And I think that's where most of the value is like you have so much capital coming into the NFT space, so that in the next bear market we have the capacity to explore and build out these different systems for all different things we want to do with NFTs.
Yeah, I think the market is very different. I was around and I kind of saw how the ICO boom happened back in 2017, and I think one of the main kind of differences is like just the issue of liquidity. So like flipping NFTs is a lot less liquid than just trading coins. Obviously there's less in circulation, and they are non-fungible even in name, so I think I think in that sense there's the whole issue of liquidity. And the other thing is there's a lot of like utility compared like just in the general ecosystem. Back in 2017 we didn't really have a word for DeFi, and now it's a whole kind of like ecosystem. So I think that's definitely very different. And one of the main things that kind of woke me up from my kind of, because I put crypto on the side for a while. It kind of woke me up. It was like it's just how much like active use was happening on things that were designed to be done a certain way. So I think it's definitely progressed. I think it's very different, and I think the people that are less, and the whole premise behind crypto is it's going to be trustless. So like trusting people to follow on the white paper, kind of goes against a lot of the kind of core fundamentals, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the first projects on Ethereum that really took off, and like you had kids installing MetaMask on playgrounds and whatever, was CryptoKitties, which was like one of the I mean, it wasn't one of the earliest NFT projects, but one of the ones that it was about the time when the 721 standard started to like emerge, and that actually caused scaling problems for Ethereum at some point, and like there were some things that needed to be figured out, and then we kind of saw the NFT hype, but then it kind of like died down. But now, like what's happening now is kind of just like an amplification, I feel, of what happened back then.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I remember when CryptoKitties first came out, and the kind of like, you know, the whole talk about that. Yeah, I totally agree, and yeah, it's just so kind of interesting. I mean, one thing I'm quite interested in learning from you is, do you kind of like, in terms of like EIPs and ERC standards, do you see like Ceramic as like kind of having their own kind of standard? If I mean, I suppose you can integrate already, through JSON files, but going forward, would you want to like implement your own kind of standard that is primarily focused through these data streams, or are you kind of happy with the current system as it is?
In terms of standards for Ethereum, or
Yeah, yeah.
hmm. um, one standard that we're excited about right now in terms of the EIP processes is it probably doesn't even have a number yet, but it's a sign in with Ethereum effort that we are part of. It's being led by Spruce ID and ENS, and so they want to create a standard way of signing into like Web2 servers with an Ethereum wallet. And so a bunch of projects do this already, like OpenSea um, and whatnot. So like you basically the server sends like a response, which is basically it's a random number, and the user signs that with their address, with their key, like basically with their MetaMask wallet, and send the signature back um, to the backend. And basically now you have like an authenticated, that the backend server knows that they're interacting with the correct user. And this is obviously nice to kind of tie into the Web2 ecosystem a little bit, and like allow you to use some Web2 technologies and like traditional databases. But it can also be used to authenticate to more peer-to-peer protocols, because it's just a signature and we can verify that trustlessly. So we actually are working with the people who are like making the standard to make it possible for us to use it in Ceramic as like a way to authenticate with one signature, and then like basically issue a capability that allows an application to write to a stream on behalf of the user, and that can still live completely in the front end. It's also possible to do that for the backend, but I think more interestingly is that you would like generate a session key in the browser, pop up a message and sign it with your wallet. That's basically like sign in and grant the application right to these different streams, and then the session key can write to a limited number of your data streams that you control with your DAD. And so we want to make sure that like this standard for like sign in with Ethereum can also support this with kind of minimal modification. So I guess that's like the one thing that's happening in EIP land right now that we're the most excited about. And I guess obviously like we would want like similar type of efforts and standards in other blockchain ecosystems for this kind of sign-in type behavior. And if we do it right in Ethereum land, we can replicate that work easily to other blockchains, hopefully.
A lot of what I see happening right now, versus just even like a year or two ago when I was first really starting to look at the space, is that the infrastructure is there for people to actually build the things that they were dreaming about in 2017 in the sort of ICO boom, like you say, with these like white papers where people had the idea but no way to actually put it together. Um, Besides identity and that sort of layer, what other sort of piece of critical infrastructure do you think we need to focus on building out so that we can build the things that we're dreaming of?
It's a hard question because it depends a lot on like what type of application you're looking to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's
Um,
it's a little broad. I'm just trying to kind of fish for maybe where else you see that infrastructure maybe lacking, or if you've seen someone try to build those new railroads kind of thing.
yeah. Um, hmm. Like I mean, there's definitely so if you think about the L1 blockchains, you kind of have the financial rails and like kind of tie into or like the basics of like a social kind of network system that mostly the financial aspect of it
Mm-hmm.
with ceramic, and like we provide like a data layer for application state and user data management, which I think is an important aspect. Then I think I mean you mentioned earlier the graph, um, as like a way to index and create different views on top of all of this different data for both social and blockchain data. Um, then I mean there are some different protocols working on like various types of like computation, uh, more trustless 3D rendering for like larger projects and stuff like that. I think there's like a lot to be explored in kind of decentralized or distributed machine learning,
Mm.
because right now, um, most of machine learning that happens is done, you have some big data set on your server, and then you run your algorithm on that, and try to fit the model to the data. um, there are projects like OpenMind, that have an architecture for how to train machine learning models without having all the data come um, to one location,
Mm-hmm.
called federated machine learning. It's actually like the technique itself was like developed by Google, because they didn't want to send all of the data from mobile devices to their servers. This is going to be too much data.
That's fun.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that they just like take all of your data and put it on their servers, but like it's too much data for them. But what OpenMind does is do that in a more privacy preserving way. Yes, so OpenMind can do this in a more privacy preserving way, where you kind of encrypt the model and send it, and um, there's a bunch of different techniques that they use. I think they developed like a few different. They developed their system from like a few different angles. Um, so I think that's really interesting. That's mostly in Python right now. It's like makes it hard to run in web, um, and there are like other limitations with that. I think if you can combine that with like an incentive system, and have these models be collectively owned by a community or a DAO or something like that, you can start building really interesting ways to like create social networks, or dig out data from like historical interactions or whatnot. So that's definitely like an underexplored space.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like a very complex space. The number of people who really understand machine learning and really understand blockchain, is quite limited in the world. Um,
You can kind of imagine a scenario though where similar to like I remember SETI at home was a big deal. It's like lots of people who didn't have a clue of how to, search for extraterrestrial life or map out a star plot or whatever, were able to contribute meaningfully to like that project. So I'm just wondering if there's enough people out there that are interested in AI or machine learning and stuff, but you know uh, if that's potentially a way they could contribute without going to get a master's degree or what have you.
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that part is the easy part, is like making people run it. If there's like, if that's a incentivized, you get some tokens for running it, or
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like more of study at home where you run it for fun and or to contribute to like a meaningful project. I think once you have the system built, that is not really that difficult.
Mm.
The more difficult part is like designing the system, thinking about, okay, how does the crypto economic incentives play out together with which type of machine learning architecture should I use and why? Like combining all of that knowledge into like actually building the system
Yeah.
is extremely hard. And even if you have people running the system, you still need to build a system.
Yeah, no, that definitely checks out. It's like if we can build it, they will come.
I mean, if we can build it, I'm sure we can find use cases that will make people run it.
Yeah. uh, Grit, did you have anything else on that angle or?
No, I think we've ticked all the boxes on my end. Yeah, I think we can wrap up here, right, Pat? Unless you had anything else.
Yeah, no, that's basically covered everything there. Is there anything you really wanted to touch on, Joel, or any project or person you want to shout out?
Not at the top of my mind. This was really fun to do a deep dive. So thank you guys.
Yeah, no worries. We definitely appreciate to have you on, and we'll let you know when we are ready to go live with this project.
Awesome. Well, take care.